right, and I'm actually already seeing a couple folks in here. Welcome, everybody, to the Lawns to Legumes webinar. We'll wait just maybe a couple more minutes for any last folks to join in. In the meantime, I think we can maybe start some introductions. I'll start. My name is Shelby Roberts. You might have seen my name on some of the promotional materials or some emails that might have come out to you about this, depending on how you heard about this program. I work for the Scott SWCD. I am the Education and Outreach Specialist. I'll be giving the first part of this presentation, and I will let Hannah Matthews introduce herself. She's going to be doing the second part. Hannah, do you want to tell everyone what your title is and everything?
Sure. So I'm Hannah Matthews. Nice to meet you guys all. And I'm the Resource Conservation Technician. And I'm going to be helping with the technical side of the Lawns to Legumes program. And I also work with rain gardens and native prairie. I'll kind of pass it off to Megan now.
Hi, I'm Meghan Darley. I'm the Natural Resource Specialist at the office, also with the Scott SWCD. And kind of the same thing, I'll be helping out with some of the technical stuff, overseeing the grant, making sure everything looks good, and helping to teach everyone today about what we're trying to do here with these demonstration neighborhoods. So looking forward to working with all these great new landowners that are hopping on.
Yeah, you guys are kind of a niche market. I'm glad to see your guys' interest in this program. This will be a good little information dump for folks that are interested.
Yeah.
And I think,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think we're ready to start unless there was something else you wanted to say, Megan.
No, I was just gonna say this is a new program for us too. So hopefully we're able to answer as many questions as we can, but we're new to this type of program too. So we're excited to give it a try in Scott County.
All of us learning together. Alrighty. I think with that, we'll just dive right into things. I'll start things off. So again, this is the Lawns to Legumes program that we're debuting this year, brand new in Scott County. Let's see. This will move forward for me. Perfect. So big picture, what is Lawns to Legumes? Why is it important? Why has it been gaining so much traction? So it's a program that was just developed within this last year. It's funded both by the Environmental and Natural Resources Trust Fund and kind of headed by the Minnesota Board of Water and Soil Resources. They're two kind of large entities that do a multitude of different things, and this is just one program that is based off of the stuff that they kind of facilitate. The kind of big main program goals of Lawns to Legumes is to establish residential pocket plantings that create habitat for pollinators, and most specifically the rusty patch bumblebee, which we'll get into in just a couple slides here. So a type of residential pocket planting that is kind of coined from this program is what people are calling demonstration neighborhoods. And what these demonstration neighborhoods are is ways for more than one landowner to get together and create pollinator habitat that is kind of greater than the sum of its one part. And most specifically, these demonstration neighborhoods are going to take place in very key corridors where the rusty patch bumblebee and where very important pollinators are known to have habitat in. Again, big picture goal is just to create pollinator habitat in residential spaces. That's the one thing that we want you to take away from what this program is trying to achieve. If you want very direct, specific program information, I would really recommend visiting that link right there, the Bowser MN link /L2L, standing for Lawns to Legumes. That page will have a ton of resources for you. It will have planting guides. It will have kind of where this whole program started, and it will also show the impacts that it has across the state. Because while we're doing it here in Scott County, this is also a program that's happening in the entire state of Minnesota. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens as this program develops and what we can achieve as a whole state. It's something that I think we're going to be proud of in a couple years here. So what is a demonstration neighborhood? This is kind of a good picture to show what it could potentially look like. So this aerial of a neighborhood has little highlights all around it, and those highlights are what you could do for different pollinator plantings on your property. You could do a little rain garden. You could do a mailbox planting. You could convert your entire lawn into pollinator habitat. And my coworkers will go into like all the different details of what that would entail. But if you look at this image here, you can kind of see that these little plantings may seem small on their own, but when they're paired with a whole bunch of other little plantings that are close enough together, if you're a bee and you find a flower next to a mailbox that you can pollinate through, and then another planting that's not too far away, that expands its habitat and expands its range of where it can go, and it makes those plantings greater than just the square footage they occupy. So ideally, with these demonstration neighborhoods, we're hoping to gather multiple landowners that are close enough by that they can all do plantings and make the whole thing a very wide range where these pollinators can habitat. So hopefully that's kind of a general picture. Every neighborhood is going to be a little bit different, and that's okay. That's what we want. There's a lot of kind of personalization that you can make with these, and working with your neighbors is a good way to make a bigger impact than you can make by yourself. So that's kind of what a demonstration neighborhood could potentially look like. So what is this rusty patch bumblebee? It's the Minnesota state bee, for one, and it was recently declared endangered. So one big aspect of this program is to try and bring this guy back to what could be, you know, part of its former glory. This species used to occupy, and still does, I mean, it occupies grasslands and tall grass prairies, which are the biome that we see in this area of the state. So since its historical range, it has seen a 90% decline in what it used to be. So like I said, hopefully this program will help booster some of those numbers and help a very important species get some population back in Minnesota. Bumblebees as a whole are what we consider in the biology world as a keystone species. And you can kind of think of keystone species as a foundation in a basic ecosystem. They kind of let the rest of the species in that ecosystem flourish. And without that species, it becomes a lot harder to maintain the status quo. And people, you know pollinators for their essential role in food production, but they benefit not just plants, they benefit humans, they benefit countless amounts of other animals. It's all a web that's all interconnected. And it starts with the rusty patch bumblebee in certain cases, and pollinators as a whole. So when we can do our part to help protect these guys, it makes way more of an impact than we would even know looking at the surface. So with that, that's kind of a little bit of the overview of what this program is as a whole and what we're trying to protect here and what our big goals are. I am going to switch over the next little part of this presentation to my coworker, Hannah. So Hannah, if you would like to take it away.
Sure. Alrighty. So let's start with what is a legume. So it's a perennial plant that cycles nitrogen gas from the air, and then it stores it in the roots, supplying nitrogen to the soil. And nitrogen is a key source of just vitamins and minerals for these plants to grow and to thrive. And so if we move into the types of plantings we're looking at, we have the first one is pocket plantings. And these ones are super beautiful. They're, for say, I think just a great way to make those pocket plantings that we're really talking about, just little corridors here and there. And so there's different ways you could design these. You can do manicured or unmanicured. So in the top right corner, you can see how there's, stone around them. And sometimes this is nice if you do more of like a prairie looking pocket planting. It will give a barrier from the grass and then make an area where just those natives will grow. And for the program, we're thinking the minimum is going to be 150 square feet on a property. So if you wanted to do, 50 square feet up by your mailbox and then 100 in the backyard, and that can go, that's just the minimum. So you can, do your whole backyard and like this beautiful planting or, whatever you kind of feel like it. But the next kind of part is the maintenance. So with these plantings comes more or less a weekly maintenance or monthly maintenance. You want to keep the weeds under control for sure in the first, couple weeks into that first year, just keeping just like the grass out or just a couple things that pop up. And that'll really give the natives a chance to make their roots nice and deep and just flourish. And then down the road, if you did more of like a manicured look and they're for say outgrowing their space, you can always split them and plant them somewhere else and give your property more color over there, or kind of what you're thinking. But with that comes the installation of it. And so it kind of depends on what you're going to be doing, but mostly there's the option of just using a sod cutter, and this will just remove that grass off the top and leave you with bare dirt. But it is a little bit of labor intensive, so that is something to think about. And if you have super clay soils, you can always add like a sandy compost, and that will give it better drainage for those plants. And after you get the plants, you're ready to plant them, but you want to mulch it first to make sure that those weeds are at least suppressed a little bit. And so we look for about a 3-inch sheet mulch over the top of just a shredded non-dyed hardwood. That works pretty well. And for these plants, we usually think like 12 to 18 inches apart, depending on your plant size. We do have a plant sale in the spring, and usually those ones we plant about 12 to 18 inches apart. And the planting window you usually have from like May 15th to June 30th, depending on how the season has been going. It was pretty hot and dry this season, so even in that May to June 30th, they need a well amount of water to get established. So the next one, kind of planting that you could do is just flowering trees and shrubs. And these are really great for our habitat and also the pollinator like food source. And they give your property a really nice, neat appearance, whether you wanted to do, you know, a border along like a neighbor to just give you privacy, but it also benefits the pollinators. And so for the installation of these, it's pretty straightforward. You just gotta dig the holes and then plant them. And you can mulch around them, but it's more or less your preference. And then we have maintenance, and this would just be depending on what kind of tree or shrub you got, but pruning them annually, you know, to keep them more manicured, or if you wanna kind of let them get big, and that's totally up to you. And then some may need winter protection from rabbits. Some rabbits like to eat the bottom of the plants and it could damage them. So moving on to the next kind of planting, we have the pollinator lawn. And this is great because there's less mowing than a traditional lawn. And the installation is pretty simple for this one. You just need to overseed either into your existing lawn, or you can remove the whole lawn depending on how big your property is, and then reseed it with like a white clover red fescue mix. This we're looking at if you wanted to reseed the whole property after November 1st is a really great time when there's just like a little bit of snow, and throughout the winter and into the spring it will get down to the soil and work its way in. So that is a really great way to seed for your lawn. The maintenance of this, so every year or every couple years you can overseed to promote more flowers, and like in this this property it's just super full, and this would give great pollinator food and habitat for the rusty patch bumblebee and butterflies to come. And another thing to think about for maintenance, you just need to raise your mower height to try to mist the flowers so you keep them as long as possible, but you can mow the grass that's above them. And then if you have any noxious weeds, such as thistles, you would want to pull them and make sure they don't spread. And another planting that we are looking at is pollinator meadows. And these have the best habitat value and are great for larger lots. If you have, you know, a couple acres and you just don't want to mow at all, and you just want a beautiful prairie to look out on, this is a great one for you. The installation is pretty kind of just like the other ones. You have to remove the sod, and you can either do this through the sod cutter, sheet mulching, which is like laying a big tarp over this area and killing the grass underneath, or some type of herbicide or tillage. And then flowing into the maintenance of it. So you're looking at mowing twice a year for the first year to make sure that those weeds don't go to seed and that the pollinators have or the native plants have a chance to make their roots really nice and deep and get established. And then on the years 2 and above, just spot mowing or spot spraying to control those weeds so they're not spreading and they're not overtaking the meadow. So I think with that, I will pass it off to Megan.
You got it, Megan?
I have to unmute myself. Okay, we're good. Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Started talking. All right. So just a couple other practices that you can try. Rain gardens are another practice that we do in the office that also are great for pollinators. They're similar to the pollinator gardens, but they require just a little bit more thought and planning when you put them in. And the idea behind them is that if you have wet areas or if you have areas that you want to capture some runoff from your roof, you can do a garden with these native plants, but it's more of a basin to capture water. So this is a program that we have in the office in addition to this, but these can also be included in your plantings if you want to add some rain gardens to your property. They help infiltrate water quicker and maybe you can resolve some wet, soggy issues that you have on your property. And these are just actually all examples of rain gardens that were done. This one on the top right was done, I think this is about 3 years ago now. So this was the first year that was planted. The plants are pretty small, and then as you can see over time, they really start to fill in. This one's got water pouring into it. You can do kind of more of like a thick, full one like this. You can keep it more manicured with edging. It's similar to the pollinator plantings, but these are multi-purpose. They're for pollinators, and they're also to help resolve some drainage and water issues you might have in your property. If you happen to live on lakeshore or streams or any type of ditch where you want to do a buffer, we could also do a buffer planting. It's the same concept really as the pollinator meadow. You're going to be removing vegetation and restoring it to native prairie plants. These are all done from seeding because they're a little bit bigger areas. These are really high quality projects that can be done. Like I said, if you happen to have some water, some ponds, wetlands, lake on your property, this is another great option to add some pollinator habitat. So for those that are just listening to this presentation, you're like, okay, there's lots of great ideas, but really where can I install a pollinator planting on my property? The goal of this is that we're getting habitat throughout urban areas, and it can really be in some creative areas. So boulevards are really cool way that you can incorporate them. Instead of mowing that little strip of lawn between your sidewalk and the road, think about doing some plantings there, converting that to native flowers and grasses or along the edge of your sidewalks. Go to the next slide. You could also do mailbox plantings, just doing some native plants around your mailbox. Don't let them get too tall so your mailman doesn't get mad, but those are just really simple things around trees, tree rings. You can incorporate some native plants. The idea is to get a little bit creative. We realize that a lot of our urban landowners might not have a lot of acreage to work with, but that doesn't mean that you can't do a little bit of planting here and there to get up to that 150 square feet that we're looking for. So just some ideas of quick and easy things that you can do that are really pretty. And so we're here as technical staff to help you design all of these. We're there to make recommendations on what types of plants to use, where to plant them. And the big thing that we're going to look at in your property is what's the sunlight, how many hours of sun you're getting that day, what's the shade level, what types of soils do you have water ponding, what types of, is it clay, is it silty, is it draining well, and we'll make recommendations on plants that we know will work well for your property. So we don't expect all of our landowners to just say, okay, I know what I'm going to put in this spot. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you pick them out. We just are looking for people that are willing to put them on their property, and we're here to guide you on how to have a successful planting. So don't feel like you have to like take everything that we said in this workshop either and just remember it all for your planting. We will be working with you throughout the process to have a nice planting on your property. Probably the biggest thing that we would recommend when you're doing plantings is to group them, because a lot of times these native plants, it's hard to identify them when they're young and when they're not flowering. So we will help do a planting plan for you, along with selecting good ones. And then one of the key components, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the grant requirements, is that we want these plantings on your property to bloom throughout the entire growing season. So we want species that are blooming in the spring, summer, and the fall, and we will help you pick out plants that can do that. And we're going to talk about those next. So there are some plants that we just really recommend for these plantings and that we're going to encourage people to try and use because they're considered superfoods for pollinators, that they just bloom really long and they provide really good food and habitat for them. And they're also really, really pretty. So the first one, or the first couple, would be the wild white indigo, Virginia bluebells, blazing star. There's multiple types of blazing star too, and of the bluebells. Virginia bluebells blooms early in the spring. Blazing star is kind of an all summer one, starting like July through August. And wild white indigo is a little bit early in the year. So that would be a good example of 3 paired species that would do well in the planting and provide blooms all year long. Any of the pentstemons or the beard tongues are great for habitat. Same with the goldenrods. Those bloom late in the year, so it's nice to have something that blooms in September and October. And then bergamot or bee balm, monarda, it's all the same name for the same plant. That's a really popular one, especially with the rusty bumble patch bee. They love their bergamot. Adding in some more reds. Cardinal flower is one of my favorites, and it's a really great pollinating species. Columbine is a great one for shady areas. The same with the giant blue hyssop, that does good in shadier areas, and both of those bloom pretty early in the year and throughout the season. And then asters. Asters are the ones that you're going to see the most in the coming months. If you're looking at August, September, they are going to be pretty much a staple in most of our plantings because they bloom so late in the year. Excuse me. Okay. The last one are milkweeds, which most people are pretty familiar with. Butterfly, common, marsh swamp. Those are great species for all of our monarch butterflies. Most people know that, but we'll definitely want to encourage some milkweeds in your planting. So Hannah mentioned pollinating trees can be good for habitat as well. So anything that's got the flowers in the spring would be a pollinating tree. You can do a lot of different things, but serviceberry, basswood, and plum are the most popular, and they're rank pretty high for us on good habitat. And then you can also do shrubs. Chokeberry is beautiful in the fall. It's got the bright red leaves. It's got the berries for the birds. And then, of course, it blooms in the spring. Same with cranberry highbush and red twig dogwood. All provide habitat throughout the entire season, even in the winter. So these are great plants for our pollinators and for our wildlife too. So where to purchase these species? A lot of people are probably looking at this and thinking, like, I love coneflowers, so where do I get them from? We do have a lot of resources. One of them is this list up here, which we will send and share with everyone that is interested. But we really want to make sure that the plants that you're picking are coming from a nicotinoid-free nursery, so we're not going to be using pesticides on them. That's really important. We don't want to discourage our pollinators. And these are all some really good local places that have these plants. We also have a tree and shrub sale in the spring, as well as a plant sale, where we're going to have these types of species available. But just know there's lots of different resources. You might not see them at Home Depot, but you'll see them at other local nurseries that will have these great plants, and we can help you find them as well. So with that, I think we're going to take a little break, and we're going to talk about the grant and how to apply for it and all that next. But if anyone has questions, maybe on what we just talked about, the different types of plantings, please feel free to send them in the chat. Is there anything on there, Shelby?
Let me see. Let me pull it up here really quick. Bear with us. We're doing a little bit of shifting behind the scenes here. Oh, unfortunately, it looks like we just had somebody head out who did have a question. Sorry about that, John. We'll definitely be in contact with you soon. Let's see. If anybody has any questions, feel free to pop them in here.
I do see one wondering about estimates on what to budget for materials and labor for installation on a per acre basis. It looks like they're asking about pollinator meadows. So that is pretty site dependent, but just roughly, native prairie seed usually runs anywhere from $200 to $300 an acre just for the seed alone. And then depending on if you're able to do the labor yourself, if you have a tractor, if you're gonna be like hand spreading it, if it's crop field or if it's lawn, there's a lot of different factors that would affect that. But just the seed alone is going to be anywhere from $200 to $300 for an acre. And I should note that this program has a max of 3 acres. We have our separate program through our office that we do prairie restorations. If you're looking to do more of that, you might be a better fit for that program. But I would say on average, it's about $500 an acre to install like a native prairie planting or a meadow. And that's just really dependent on, and they're asking, do you do site visits? Yes, we are going to be doing site visits for sure. We can do site, so that maybe we didn't mention this early on, but as employees of the Scottsville Water District, we are available to do site visits for just about anything related to conservation. So if you're watching this webinar and you're like, maybe this isn't a good fit for me, we would be able to come out on site and talk to you about individual planting and provide technical expertise for anything. Even if you apply for the grant and you don't get it, that's what we do, is we come up to people's property and we help them plan conservation on their properties. So this is kind of a unique grant where you need to have your neighbors on board, but we have lots of different programs. We have a rain garden program, we have a prairie program, we have a lakeshore restoration program, where we can help people do these types of conservation practices. So even if this isn't a good fit for you, we are available all the time to come out and provide help.
Mm-hmm.
I just see one more question about that prairie. 500 is labor only or labor and materials. Typically, if you did the project yourself, that'd be labor and materials. If you're looking to hire a contractor, it's going to be much, much more expensive. But we do also, as a soil monitor, we are able to see the prairie. So we can talk about that maybe separately if you have more questions, because there's a lot of caveats to the prairie planting.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and
that,
there was one question earlier. It was just, will this information about grant application instructions be emailed to attendees? Yes. The answer for that is totally 100%. If you signed up for this, you'll be getting an email within like the next couple of days or so that will contain a contact slip for us if you are interested in reaching out more to get like any additional information that you might want for this grant application process. And with that, you will also receive a copy of the grant application and a link to this recorded webinar. So this webinar is being recorded right now for people to reference after the fact for those who might not have been able to come today. So yes, the follow-up email will contain all that information for you. Mm-hmm. And one more question here. Do you need to set an appointment for, I'm assuming the site visits is what they're asking, I believe. And that is kind of a step that's a little bit further down the road. And Megan, you might be able to elaborate a little bit more on this, but site visits will be done after the application process is complete. So at that point, we'll kind of, I'll go into this, that's kind of the next step of this presentation here. But the rough timeline, without getting too spoilery, it's going to be you apply for the grants, we'll rank them and we'll figure out what our awardees will be. And then after that point, that's when the site visits and technical assistance will happen. let's see. One question that I see here from the Q&A, someone's got about approximately 5 acres. Could you potentially only plant 3 of those 5, or better to do a entire prairie restoration? You want to take that one, Megan?
Yeah, yes, it just depends. I mean, if you have neighbors and you're trying to do the joint project, you could do this with lawns and legumes, but more than likely it sounds like you're looking at doing a prairie restoration on your property. So you might do better off with our different programs. So we can set up a visit and talk about it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Those are all the questions that I see for now. So I'll move forward with the next part of the presentation, and then we'll have another section of questions after that is done as well. So if you have more questions, again, feel free to just type them in the chat whenever you have them, or wait till, we ask again. So moving on to the nitty-gritty, the actual grant application process. So who is eligible to apply for a Scott County Lawns to Legumes grant? Big broad terms, it's neighborhoods, townhome associations, and basically any like privately owned land. So this grant does not cover spaces such as schools or churches or stuff like that. It has to be done like primarily they're targeting neighborhoods, kind of as we've been saying. For the Scott County program, we are requiring neighborhoods to have at least 3 participants, so 3 different homes. And those homes should be located within a ½ kilometer of each other at most, which equates to about 4 city blocks of each other. So if you guys are within the same neighborhood, you shouldn't have too much of an issue of maintaining that ½ kilometer space. But at most, the distance that we would want between any of those 3 participants would be a ½ kilometer. And it's a minimum of 3 participants. If you have more people that are interested in your neighborhood, the more the merrier in this case. Do not let 3 be just the baseline. For this grant, one thing that's, I mean, this whole grant is pretty unique. As my coworker was saying, it's something that isn't just done on an individual scale. You are working with your neighbors for this grant. And as a result of that, just to kind of maintain some simplicity with that, each application that is put forward initially is going to have 1 primary person of contact for the actual application itself. And I can go into that a little bit here. So what are some of the requirements that you'll see on the application? All sites for Lawns to Legumes must be located within the boundaries of Scott County. All plants that you use in whatever type of planting that you do, and again, there's a wide variety of them, but all of the plants must be native to Minnesota. And my coworkers were getting into this a little bit already, but we want plants to have stuff that bloom in or throughout the entirety of the growing season, excuse me. So we want plants that are blooming through the spring, summer, and the fall to create a maximum effect for these pollinators and to give them as much habitat and food as possible. Plantings must comply with the Bowser Planting for Pollinators guide. And at the bottom of the slide right here, you'll see that link that was located at the beginning of this presentation. You can find that pollinator guide at that location, at the Bowser site, along with a whole bunch of other stuff. So if you have any questions about the technicalities of that, feel free to reach out to us, or you can visit that Bowser link right there. Projects that are located within easements, right-of-ways, or marked in utility locations are subject to the owner's prior approval. Those sites are a little bit more specific and site dependent, so if you have any questions regarding something like that, we would encourage you to reach out to us before you would put forward that application, just so that we can kind of talk about some of the technicalities and figure out what might be happening at that specific site. And finally, no use of pesticides within 200 feet of the project. We kind of already covered the fact that we require all plants to be grown without the use of pesticides, and we want them to continue to grow without the use of pesticides once they've been put into your plantings. So that is one of the more higher up requirements that we have for this. And we touched on this a little bit as well, but site visits are required after the grants are awarded. So before you begin any of these plantings, we at the SWCD will be there to provide any and all technical support that you would need. And we are going to be there with you to make sure that these plantings are done in their optimum setting in the best way possible. So that's what our nuggets of information are for. So the plantings have to be done within certain priority areas as well. And luckily for us in Scott County, we are already encompassing all of the 3 different priority areas for the habitat range of the rusty patch bumblebee. That's kind of how this grant was determined, and how we were awarded this grant too, is that the majority of the land in Scott County is the highest priority possible. So plantings can be done in any priority, but we specifically are really trying to focus our demonstration neighborhoods on the priority 1 areas, which encompass a lot of the urban lands in Scott County anyways. So this is just a map of Scott County right here, showing that green highlighted area right there where we really want to focus our plantings. And if you look really closely at it, you'll see these kind of different weavings and striped kind of bluish sections that are conservation corridors. And those are sections of the land that are already considered very high priority for conservation. And Scott County has a lot of land in that. So we are in a really prime area to be housing these plantings. We're pretty lucky. So here's what our grant application page 1 looks like. And there's a lot of words on here. Don't feel like you have to write any of this down. This is one of the documents that will be sent to you as a participant of this webinar right here. So this is going to be the first page of what you fill out if you and some of your neighbors are interested in applying for a demonstration neighborhood. So you can see the very top there, that's where you're going to put that primary neighborhood contact. So whoever is going to be doing most of the communication initially, at least, with the Scott County office, that's where their name and information is going to go. And the terms and conditions and the eligibility requirements are kind of what I've already covered. So the requirements of keeping pesticides out and making sure that there's at least 3 participants. That's the language that's seen in there. And then there is also a installation timeline, which I'll go into a little bit as well. But this is page 1 of the application. And then here's page 2 and 3. Page 2 is where the primary contact, or whoever's going to be putting their name on the application, page 2 is where they're going to get information from the rest of the neighbors that would be interested in also applying for this grant. So from there, they would put in, all this information. The practice type category is where you would put in whatever type of planting you are thinking that you want to do initially, whether that be a rain garden or a pollinator meadow or native prairie or a boulevard planting, whichever is applicable for that site. So you would put down all of that information right there and have that for the application process, just the application process. So if it moves forward, there'll be some additional paperwork, but that's later down the road. And then page 3 is another copy of the map that you saw earlier, just showing kind of where the priority areas are and a good reference for whichever neighborhood is applying to kind of see, okay, which priority area am I in? Am I in priority 1, 2, 3? And that's going to be important because right below that, you'll see our ranking criteria. So all applications that come through, none of them are guaranteed a demonstration neighborhood grant. It's going to be based on kind of a ranking process and seeing, what comes in, how much funding we have, how many we can do. And we're going to prioritize certain projects that are located within conservation corridors, within the priority 1 area. We're going to be ranking based on project visibility, because there is an aspect of this program that is education and creating awareness for pollinators that go beyond just this program, that might inspire, somebody driving down the road to also be like, oh, those are really beautiful flowers. How did you get those in? And then, they spread their own plantings somehow as well in the future. Different types of practices, if you have, multiple rain gardens, or if you've got a rain garden and a prairie and a boulevard planting, all of those things, if you've got a variety in there, that's going to boost up your score as well. So this is just a reference that you can look at that will show you kind of how we're going to be looking at things behind the scene to figure out which application is the strongest and which ones we want to be moving forward with. So something for applicants to consider as well when they're filling it out is to make sure that they're taking all of those things into consideration as well. And so what is the actual cost share portion of this? What is the details of the grants that will be awarded? So as I kind of said already, the applications are reviewed on a ranking criteria. So nothing is guaranteed when you put something forward, but we are announcing that the cost share rates for projects is going to be anywhere from between 50 to 75% of your project total. And that 50 to 75% range is going to depend based on what projects you do. So it's looking back at the types of projects and the different ranking criteria that we have, your project location, that's going to determine how much cost share it is. It's going to be a very case-by-case scenario as well. So leaving that a little bit more general at this point. Third point on there, the cost share is paid as a reimbursement. As any of the cost share applications that come through our office, this one is no different. It's a reimbursement policy. So you will pay for the installation and the maintenance up front, and then submit those different forms like invoices and receipts, and then you will be reimbursed after the project has been verified by our technicians. And that process can be spelled out in more detail as you move forward with your grant application. Another thing to note for the Lawns to Legumes program is that signage is required for this. And it will be provided to you by us for just participating in this program if you are awarded a grant application. The signage is to promote the education part of this program. It's to show like this is a pollinator planting for people who are interested and walking past, and to get more eyeballs on it. So it's a high priority for Lawns to Legumes. Another thing to note is that whatever project you do does need to be installed and maintained for a minimum of 10 years. And we do this to ensure that whatever projects do get installed have a long-lasting effect, and that they are able to get habitat and food for pollinators for more than just 1 year, and can help boost your populations for longer than, you know, just a typical garden might be. And final thing to note is that status reviews are also required on these projects. And that kind of ties into the previous points of being installed in for 10 years, in that our status reviews are just a checkup that we'll do occasionally to make sure that the projects are being maintained to their proper standards. So status reviews would just be a chance for us to check in, make sure maintenance is up to speed, or any corrections that we might be able to take. So what is the timeline for all of this? I won't go through the entire thing, kind of more just big highlights. And again, this timeline is located on the actual application sheets, so you can reference it, you know, at any time from there. But a couple dates to just note in your calendar that are coming up here. First thing that we really want applicants to do is to listen to this webinar. So if you're here already, check the first thing off the list. Way to go. Next date that you want to keep in mind is that our applications are going to be due to our office on September 1st. So from here on out, you have about a month to get in contact with your neighbors and come up with a plan and fill out that 3-page application and get that back to us at the office. After that, that's when it kind of falls into our court to look through the different applications and award the awardees, however that may go. So 2 dates to keep in mind right now. September 1st is when the grants are due. And throughout that time, get in touch with your neighbors, and if they have a chance, have them watch this webinar to get an overview of the program and kind of know what they're signing up for in that case. So as kind of a final note here, just want to give a quick shout out to the many partners who have helped put this whole thing together. So I mentioned earlier that this is a program that's being kind of headed by the Board of Water and Soil Resources and the Environmental Resources or Natural Resources Trust Fund, excuse me. But here in Scott County, on a very local level, we have a ton of different partners that work with us on a daily basis that also put in forth effort and time to help get this program launched. And those in no particular order are the Prior Lake Spring Lake Watershed District, the Scott Watershed Management Organization, and the Lower Minnesota River Watershed District as well. So we work with those partners on the daily. They do fantastic things in Scott County as well, and they also have a part in this whole program. So shout out to them. This is a big, good team effort here, and we're looking forward to working with you guys on everything. So with that, this is the last slide that we have here, and I'll leave this up throughout the final kind of Q&A session, but here is our contact information. So both me, Hannah, and Megan, you can reach out to any of us on any questions that you might have. Hannah is going to be taking kind of more of the technical aspect of things. So I guess there's no ranking of who you can contact, but there's our contact information for you to reference at any point. So with that, that's the end of my portion of it. I'll keep an eye on the chat and the Q&A here, but Megan, is there anything else that you wanted to mention in that last portion?
No, I think you did a great job explaining it. I think just the biggest thing is when you're filling out the application with your neighbors, you don't feel like you have to know exactly what you're going to do in your property. Like, I'm going to do 200 square foot rain garden. Just put on what you're proposing and what you'd like to do. And of course, when we come out on your site, we're going to help you decide where it should be located and what size it really should be if you have other recommendations. So don't feel like you need to know exactly where the planting is going to be and what you're going to plant in it when you're filling this out. It's more just of an idea of what you're proposing that your neighbor is going to do. And there's nothing that's tying you to this. We just want a proposal that's saying, like, we want to do these different types of plots. We're not going to come out there and be like, you're not doing it, you're fired. Like, you know, we're going to work with you guys, but just get an idea of what people think that they're going to want to install. It's going to be next spring when these plantings are probably going to be installed, so there's plenty of time to plan over the winter, but we're just looking to find a good candidate or two of neighborhoods that are interested in doing some of these plantings on their property. And then we'll help you, you know, figure out what types of plants to put in there. We'll help put together cost estimates, let you know what we think it's going to cost. I did see there had been a question about cost for prairie, but I thought I would just throw in, since we do these a lot, typically for like a rain garden or a small planting, it's usually around $250 for 150 square feet of like a pollinator garden. That's a pretty good rough number. And then we'd be cost sharing about 50% of that. So you can expect that's about what your out-of-pocket cost would be, you know, $100 to $150 for each of these practices. And landowners would be responsible for, you know, footing the bill for the other half of that. So I just think that's helpful to know. They're not very expensive projects. But certainly if you're looking at converting larger areas, you know, the price can go up, and that's what we have cost share for, to help pay for that and encourage people to do it. So yeah.
Yeah, I will go back. I guess I don't know how much detail folks might need on the timeline. Oh, if it will even let me go backwards. Huh. I was gonna try and go back to the timeline slide, but I fear I have broken it now.
I did see that there was one question that came in. What do you suggest for controlling crown vetch that gets into a pollinator plot? Crown vetch is kind of tough. Probably the best thing to do would be like an herbicide treatment, spot spraying, or hand pulling. It doesn't really, it's so low growing that if you try mowing, you might not always get it. So that's probably the best way to do crown vetch. And if it's a big planting, and it's like established prairie, burning is for sure the best if you have invasive species. But if you're talking about a small area that you've planted, spot spraying or hand pulling might be way to go for that. I don't see any other questions coming in. Yeah.
Okay.
For
Yeah, I
now.
don't see any either. Any
So
questions?
Shelby, do you want to just mention that you're just going to send out information afterwards? I think you did already, but just let people know.
Yep, for sure. Yes. For all of the people who registered for this webinar, you'll be getting an email from the Scott SWCD within like a week or so, I would say, that will contain like a kind of a survey of just how we did in this webinar, because we're always looking to improve, especially in our new webinar format, because we would usually do this in person, but we're kind of figuring out how to do things virtual now. So you'll see that survey that you can take. There'll be a kind of contact slip within that survey that will indicate that you want a follow-up with the technician if you have any questions about our application process at this point. And then in that email, we'll also have a link to this webinar that you can either watch again if you need anything to reference, or you can pass on to other neighbors that you know are interested in this program. They can take a look at it too. So all that information, oh, and a copy of the grant application as well, of course. So all of that stuff will be in that email. Yeah, I'm not seeing any more questions here. So, perfect.
Well, please feel free to reach out to us if you have them later, or if you just have other questions about other conservation needs too. Like I said, that's what we do. We're here to help people. We don't charge anything for site visits. It's all free. And we have lots of different programs too. So please feel free to utilize us as a resource for any of your needs on your property. And thanks for tuning in on this beautiful evening. I feel bad that people are in their house. We should all probably go outside now. So
yes, grab the last little bit of daylight, guys. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you both Megan and Hannah for your information.
Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.